I wanted to get this out in time for Black History Month, but that didn't happen because life. So pretend it's still February. Anywho, here's a video talking about the Black abolitionist woman suffrage power couple because more people need to know about this. Robert Purvis was born August 4th, 1810 in Charleston, South Carolina. Robert's maternal grandmother was Dito Bararaca, a former enslaved woman who was kidnapped at age 12 from Morocco and sold as a slave in Charleston, South Carolina. At 19, the piece of shit who owned her died and freed her in his will. Robert's maternal grandfather was Baron Judah from an elite Jewish American family. Robert claimed that his grandparents were married, but there is little historical evidence to suggest that they were. Given that the Judah family owned slaves and were upper class, any official marriage between a former enslaved woman and someone from the Judah family would have caused a huge scandal, though it is possible that Dito Bararaca and Baron Judah had eloped secretly or at the very least behaved as if married. Robert's mother was Harriet Judah, a free-born woman of color. His father was William Purvis, a British immigrant who moved to America to make his fortune as a cotton salesman. Robert's parents lived in a common-law marriage since interracial marriage was illegal. The family, William, Harriet, and their 3 sons moved to Philadelphia so that their sons could receive a good education at the Pennsylvania Abolition Society's Clarkson School. William had intended to move the family back to England so that his black sons could have a better future. But before the family could move, William Purvis died in 1826. Harriet Judah was unable to secure the needed documents to move the family, being a woman of color that was unable to inherit. But the sons, William, Robert, and Joseph, inherited a $250,000 estate, which is worth about $7 million today. William Jr. died of tuberculosis in 1828, increasing the inheritance that Robert and Joseph received. Robert and Joseph put the money into their abolition work. Robert married Harriet Davy Forten September 13, 1831. Harriet Davy Forten was born 1810 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Harriet was the daughter of James Forten, born in 1766, a wealthy, free-born inventor, businessman, and abolitionist. James Forten was taken prisoner during the Revolutionary War. After the war, James Forten started work under Robert Bridges, a wealthy white sailmaker. James Forten used his start in business to focus on abolition work and to start a school with Grace Douglas, a fellow black abolitionist, so that his children and other black children had access to a good education. James Forten's 9 children received the best education money could buy. Harriet and her sisters were trained to be proper, refined women, training that Harriet would later use to her advantage when organizing abolition fundraisers and making speeches for women's suffrage. Harriet and Robert's relationship was strange for that time period. Due to Robert's light skin, he was often mistaken for a white man, and when Harriet and Robert were together in public, they would face harassment for being an interracial couple. One such incident was at the 1833 Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society Conference. Robert was helping Harriet out of the carriage, and angry passers-by assumed they were amalgamating the races. It just goes to show that even in biracial abolitionist groups, prejudices still existed. The hall where the conference was held was subsequently burned to the ground by pro-slavery groups. It was also strange how closely Harriet and Robert worked together. Historians Joe Trotter and Eric Liddell Smith had this to say about their relationship. The Purvis' egalitarian marriage and activist partnership presented a unique phenomenon. Few such relationships existed during the Victorian era. Their marriage demonstrated one man's commitment to the concept of equality and freedom of expression. Further, it revealed one woman's ability to transcend contemporary mores to share in both the private and public spheres of her husband's life and work. Harriet co-founded the first biracial female anti-slavery society with Lucretia Mott, appropriately named the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. They formed the society after women were excluded from the London World Anti-Slavery Convention. Robert co-founded the American Anti-Slavery Society with William Lloyd Garrison in 1833. He signed the Declaration of Sentiments that the American Anti-Slavery Society drafted. The society was the first interracial abolitionist group of its kind. Robert was president of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society in 1845 to 1850. Harriet co-chaired the Philadelphia Women's Anti-Slavery Society Fairs 1840 to 1861 and raised $32,000, over $1 million in today's money. In 1841, Harriet led the group's charge against the annual Sunday school exhibition, after the exhibition excluded black Sunday schools. The next year, the event was a biracial event. Harriet and Robert were active members of the Underground Railroad. They turned their home, Byberry Hall, into a stop on the Underground Railroad. According to records the Purvis family kept, they housed 9,000 people escaping slavery. Robert even served as the chairman of the General Vigilance Committee from 1852 to 1857, earning him the nickname the Father of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad General Vigilance Committee was responsible for overseeing everything. They organized fundraisers to help support escaping slaves, railroad conductors, and stations. They planned the routes and helped devise codes, as well as fundraise money to buy slaves' freedoms and then give them their freedom papers. The last thing was controversial among abolitionists at the time, since the money used to buy the slaves their freedom was going back into the pocket of slave traders and the Southern planter class. It's an interesting conundrum. Do you guarantee the immediate freedom of an enslaved person, even with the possibility that doing so might enslave more people? Who even knows? Harriet was also an avid member of the free produce movement. The free produce movement was started by Quakers in the 18th century as a nonviolent way to protest slavery. Participants in the movement would not buy or use any produce grown through slave labor. The free produce movement was controversial among contemporary abolitionists, as many questioned its effectiveness. All the same, several abolitionists, including the Purvis family, stuck by the free produce movement as a matter of principle. Harriet cared deeply about education. She was an active member of the Black Female Literary Association, Edgeworth Literary Association, and the Female Minervian Association. She and Robert founded the Library Company of Colored People and the Gilbert Lyceum together in 1833, which was a really busy year for the Purvises. The Library Company of Colored People was a reading subscription service that collected books and distributed them to Black citizens. This was especially important given the poor state of education for anyone who wasn't white, male, and rich. The Gilbert Lyceum was a lecture hall where people could go to hear lectures, see concerts and performances, and participate in debates. It's what people did for fun before the internet melted millennials' brains. During the Lombard Street riot, the Purvis family was forced to flee Philadelphia. The Lombard Street riot was a 3-day race riot that started August 1st, 1842. Irish immigrants, angry that Philadelphia's black population was growing due to escaping slaves settling in Philadelphia, and fears that the black population was stealing jobs. Now, who does that remind you of? Irish immigrants gathered on Lombard Street to protest. The protests turned violent, and the mob burned down black-owned businesses, churches, and homes. They surrounded the Purvis' home. As prominent abolitionists, they were prime targets. The mob was about to burn it down when a Catholic priest stood between the mob and the home and convinced them to back down. Even though the Purvises were saved from the rioters, Robert and Harriet, fearing for their 8 children's safety, moved to Byberry, a town on the outskirts of Philadelphia. But that didn't stop the Purvises. They got right back to work, establishing their new home as a safe place for abolitionists to hold meetings. Abolitionist Sally Holy called the home Saints' Rest, where the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. Following the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion in 1831, fears of another slave uprising caused a backlash against enslaved Americans and free blacks alike. One such backlash occurred in the Pennsylvania Constitution. The Pennsylvania Constitution guaranteed the right to vote for any citizen. The contention comes from how to define citizen. The definition of citizen was left to each city and township to decide. While most define citizens as white landowning men, some cities, including Philadelphia, define citizens as any free-born man, allowing black men the right to vote in Philadelphia. However, in 1838, due to backlash to the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion, a proposed amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution would make law the definition of citizens as white men, disenfranchising 40,000 black male voters. In response, Robert drafted the Appeal of 40,000 Citizens Threatened with Disenfranchisement. In it, he laid out the amount of taxes paid by black Philadelphians, no taxation without representation, the amount of money black Americans put into Philadelphia's economy, not to mention that the entire American economy was built on the backs of black Americans, the long history of black Americans in Philadelphia, and their cultural contributions. The Pennsylvania Society for the Promoting the Abolition of Slavery compiled a census of the black community as evidence to back up Robert's claims. Robert charged the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention with having laid our rights a sacrifice on the altar of slavery. I wish I could tell you that it worked, but it did not. It wouldn't be until the ratification of the 15th Amendment in 1870 that black men in Philadelphia would get the right to vote again. Robert and Harriet also worked with the American Equal Rights Association. As the name suggests, the association was dedicated to securing equal rights specifically for black Americans and women. Harriet served on the executive committee. Formed in 1866 by the 11th National Women's Rights Convention, its goal was to secure equal rights to all American citizens, especially the right of suffrage, irrespective of race, color, or sex. In the 1860s, Harriet, Robert, and Octavius Catto, a black civil rights activist, with the help of the Pennsylvania State Equal Rights League, worked to desegregate streetcars in Philadelphia. In 1867, they succeeded in passing a state law that provided equal access to public vehicles for all races. Robert was also a part of the temperance movement. The temperance movement was started in the 1820s. Its focus was to prohibit the use of alcohol. They were concerned about alcohol use given its addictive nature, the effects on a person's health, and the effects on the family. Women of the time had little recourse to defend themselves and their children from abuse. Men using alcohol are more likely to abuse their wife and children. It was a matter of safety to ban the consumption of alcohol. Harriet was also an active member of the National Women's Suffrage Association. She would give speeches for women's suffrage. Harriet and her sister, Margaretta Forten, were key organizers for the 5th National Women's Rights Convention in Philadelphia in 1854. On June 11, 1875, Harriet died from tuberculosis. Robert later remarried Tracy Townsend. Harriet and Robert had 8 children. Their daughter Hattie became the first black American vice president of the National Women's Suffrage Association. Their son Charles became a surgeon and a professor for 30 years at Howard University. Harriet and Robert also raised their niece Charlotte after her parents died. After Robert got older, he retired from public life. He died April 15, 1898. Also, a great resource to check out this month is Sensei Ashitemasu's videos on hidden figures to learn more about other incredible figures in Black history. Well, I was stuck in bed, and you were stuck here with me, but now you may go and live your lives. Go, be cute, keep gay, be crime. Bye!
Julie, do the thing.
Don't freak out, it's not real.